The fastest way to lose faith in love is to discover the person you trusted most was only pretending to deserve it. The day my future collapse began with a wedding dress. Not a dramatic explosion. Not a scandal on social media. Just a wedding dress hanging quietly beside my bedroom window, while sunlight spilled across the floor. 3 weeks. That was all that remained before my wedding. 3 weeks before I was supposed to marry Ryan Cooper. 3 weeks before I walked down an aisle and promised forever to a man I had loved for 4 years. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if my heart already knew the truth before my mind caught up. Small things had changed. Ryan answered messages later than usual. He canceled plans more often. His attention felt divided, as though part of him was already somewhere else. Every time I asked if something was wrong, he smiled and blamed work, stress, deadlines, life. I believed him because that is what people do when they love someone. They choose trust even when doubt begins whispering in the background. My name is Claire Bennett. At 27, I worked as an interior designer in downtown Chicago. My life was not extraordinary. I lived in a small apartment filled with paint samples and design sketches. I drank too much coffee. I cried during emotional movies. I spent years building a future with someone I believed would always be there. At least that was the plan. The truth arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I had left work early after a client meeting ended ahead of schedule. Ryan was supposed to be out of town attending a conference. The apartment building where we planned to live after the wedding sat only 15 minutes away. Since I suddenly had free time, I decided to stop by and leave a small surprise. Nothing dramatic. Just his favorite pastries from a bakery near my office. I remember feeling happy while riding the elevator. Hopeful. Excited about ordinary things. The kind of happiness that only exists when your world still feels safe. Then the elevator doors opened. Everything changed. At first, I noticed nothing unusual. The hallway looked exactly the same. Quiet. Clean. Familiar. Then I heard laughter coming. From inside the apartment. A woman's laughter. My footsteps slowed. Confusion arrived before fear. Ryan was supposed to be away. Maybe a relative had stopped by. Maybe a friend needed help. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. People always search for reasonable explanations when they are standing on the edge of a truth they do not want to see. The front door was not fully closed. Just slightly open. I remember the smell of fresh coffee drifting into the hallway. I remember sunlight across the kitchen floor. I remember hearing Ryan's voice. Comfortable. Relaxed. Happy. Happier than I had heard him sound in months. Then I saw enough to understand. Not every detail. I did not need every detail. Sometimes a single moment contains more truth than an entire conversation. The pastry box slipped from my hands. The sound startled everyone. Ryan turned around immediately. Shock flooded his face. Then panic. Then guilt. I wish I could tell you he explained everything. I wish I could tell you there was some misunderstanding. There was not. The silence that followed said more than words ever could. I walked away before either of them finished speaking. Down the hallway. Into the elevator. Out onto the street. Rain had started falling by the time I reached my car. Chicago traffic blurred beneath gray skies. My phone rang repeatedly. Messages appeared one after another. I ignored them all. By evening, I found myself sitting alone inside a luxury hotel lobby several miles from home. The wedding was over. The future was gone. The life I spent years building had disappeared in less than 5 minutes. I stared through enormous windows as rain streamed down the glass. Around me, strangers continued living ordinary lives. Conversations. Laughter. Business meetings. Nobody knew my world had just ended. And as I sat there holding a cold cup of untouched coffee, I had absolutely no idea that a stranger was about to walk into that hotel and change the direction of my life forever. People always say heartbreak arrives like a storm. They are wrong. Storms eventually move on. Heartbreak sits beside you and refuses to leave. Hours passed while I remained in the hotel lobby. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. The rain outside continued falling in endless silver lines across the glass. Every few minutes my phone vibrated. Ryan. Then Ryan again. Then messages from friends. Then more messages from Ryan. I ignored every single one. At some point the wedding planner called. Seeing her name on the screen nearly shattered what little composure I still possessed. I silenced the phone and stared at the city beyond the windows. Chicago looked different that night. Harder, colder, less familiar. Perhaps the city had not changed at all. Perhaps I had. The hotel lobby gradually emptied as evening turned into night. Business travelers disappeared toward elevators. Families returned to their rooms. Conversations faded. I should have gone home. Instead, I sat perfectly still, afraid of what waited there. The wedding dress. The invitations. The future I no longer had. You have been staring at the rain for almost an hour. The voice startled me. Deep, calm, controlled. I looked up. A tall man stood beside my table holding a cup of black coffee. His dark suit looked expensive without trying to look expensive. Everything about him felt deliberate, neat, disciplined, composed. He appeared to be around 35, older than me, confident in a way that suggested he rarely questioned himself. "Excuse me," I asked. "The rain." His gaze shifted toward the windows. "You seem determined to outlast it." Under normal circumstances, I probably would have ignored him. Under normal circumstances, I was not sitting alone in a luxury hotel after discovering my fiancé had destroyed our future. "Maybe I am," I replied. To my surprise, a faint smile touched his face. Not a large smile. Just enough to soften his otherwise serious expression. That strategy rarely works. Before I could respond, he glanced toward the empty chair across from me. "May I sit?" Every sensible instinct should have said no. Yet something about him felt safe. Not warm. Not friendly. Safe. There is a difference. "If you want." He sat down. Silence settled between us. Strangely, it was not uncomfortable. He did not ask personal questions. Did not offer advice. Did not pretend to understand my situation. For several minutes we simply watched the rain. Finally he spoke again. "Someone disappointed you." It was not a question. I laughed bitterly. That obvious? Only to people who have seen that expression before. His answer caught my attention. For the first time I looked at him carefully. There was something familiar about disappointment in his eyes. Not fresh disappointment. Old disappointment. The kind that had become part of someone. "Have you?" I asked quietly. He nodded once. "Yes." The simplicity of the response somehow made it more believable. My phone buzzed again. Ryan's name appeared across the screen. The stranger noticed it. His expression never changed. "You do not seem eager to answer." "I am not." "Good." I blinked. "Good. Anyone who makes you look that unhappy does not deserve immediate access to your attention." For the first time all evening I almost smiled. Almost. The stranger extended his hand. Alexander Hayes. The name hit me immediately. Nearly everyone in Chicago knew it. Hayes Global. Real estate. Technology investments. Business magazines. News interviews. One of the most successful chief executive officers in the country. I stared at him. "You are Alexander Hayes." Another small smile appeared. Unfortunately. Despite everything, an unexpected laugh escaped me. Felt strange. Foreign. Like using a muscle I had forgotten existed. Alexander noticed. His eyes softened slightly. Then he said something that would stay with me long after that night ended. Sometimes the worst day of your life is simply making room for a better one. At the time I thought he was being kind. Months later, I would realize he already intended to become part of that better future. Some people enter your life loudly. Others change your life before you realize they were ever there. After that night in the hotel lobby, I expected never to see Alexander Hayes again. Men like him existed in a completely different universe from women like me. He owned skyscrapers. I spent my days choosing paint colors and discussing furniture layouts with clients. He appeared on magazine covers. I spent weekends shopping for discounted home decor and grading design proposals. Our worlds had briefly touched because of a terrible night. That was all. At least that was what I believed. The following week became one of the most difficult periods of my life. Canceling a wedding was somehow worse than planning one. Every phone call reopened the wound. Vendors, family members, friends. Questions arrived from every direction. Sympathy, curiosity, advice. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone wanted explanations. Unfortunately, I did not have any. Ryan tried repeatedly to contact me. Messages filled my inbox. Apologies. Excuses. Promises. I ignored every one of them. Some betrayals deserved discussion. Others deserved distance. On Friday afternoon, I attended a meeting with a potential commercial design client. The project represented one of the largest opportunities my small firm had ever received. Normally, I would have been excited. Instead, exhaustion followed me into the conference room. The building overlooked Lake Michigan. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with natural light. Several executives sat around a polished table reviewing presentation materials. I entered carrying design boards and a forced smile. Then I froze. Sitting at the far end of the table was Alexander Hayes. For a brief moment, surprise flashed across his face. Then his expression returned to its usual calm composure. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Good afternoon." The room suddenly felt smaller. "Mr. Hayes." One executive smiled. "You two know each other?" Before I could answer, Alexander replied smoothly. "We have met." That was all. No mention of the hotel. No mention of heartbreak. No mention of rain or coffee or conversations beside enormous windows. Just a simple acknowledgement. Relief washed through me. The meeting began. For nearly 90 minutes, I presented design concepts while trying not to think about the chief executive officer sitting across from me. Surprisingly, Alexander asked thoughtful questions. Not difficult questions. Helpful ones. The kind that allowed me to explain my ideas more effectively. Gradually, I forgot about my nerves. I forgot about the breakup. I forgot about everything except the work itself. By the end of the presentation, something unexpected happened. I felt like myself again. The real version of myself. The version that existed before heartbreak consumed every thought. As everyone gathered their materials, Alexander approached. "You did well." The compliment felt sincere. "Thank you." He glanced briefly toward one of my presentation boards. "You speak differently when discussing design." I frowned. Differently. More confidently. His observation caught me off guard because it was true. Design remained the one thing untouched by the disaster of the previous week.
I se pouzi do.
Alexander nodded. "It suits you." Before leaving, he paused. For the first time, something almost curious appeared in his expression. One question. "Okay. What perfume do you wear?" I blinked. Of all the questions I expected, that was not one of them. Nothing expensive. I laughed awkwardly. Mostly a light jasmine fragrance. To my surprise, Alexander seemed thoughtful for a moment. Almost distracted. Then he nodded once. "I thought so." "Why?" Another rare smile touched his face. "No important reason." The answer should have ended the conversation. Instead, it left me strangely curious. Later that evening, while organizing project files at my apartment, an email arrived. The commercial contract had been approved. My company had won the project. Excitement filled the office group chat immediately. Celebrations followed. Congratulations arrived from every direction. Yet as I stared at the message on my screen, one unexpected thought entered my mind. Somewhere in Chicago, Alexander Hayes was probably finishing another successful day. And for reasons I could not explain, I found myself wondering if this would truly be the last time our paths crossed. Life becomes dangerous when hope returns unexpectedly. Not because hope hurts you. Because once you start believing again, you have something to lose. The weeks following the project approval passed faster than I expected. Work became my refuge. Every design meeting, client presentation, and renovation plan gave me something productive to focus on. Slowly, the constant ache left by Ryan's betrayal began to fade. Not disappear. Just fade enough that I could finally breathe without feeling the weight of it every second. My friends noticed the difference first. They stopped looking at me with concern and started speaking to me normally again. My parents called less frequently to check whether I was eating. Even my coworkers seemed relieved to see genuine smiles returning to my face. Yet one unexpected detail kept appearing in the background of my life. Alexander Hayes. Not constantly. Not in a way that felt intrusive. More like coincidence refusing to stay coincidental. Another meeting connected to the commercial project. A charity fundraiser sponsored by Hayes Global. An industry networking event where he happened to be present. Every encounter remained brief, professional, respectful. Still, I began noticing something unusual. Alexander remembered everything. Tiny details. The kind most people forgot immediately. During one meeting, he asked whether my grandmother had recovered after a minor surgery I mentioned weeks earlier. At another event, he remembered my favorite coffee order after hearing it exactly once. Once, he even noticed a sketchbook was missing from my portfolio case before I realized it myself. How do you remember all this? I finally asked during a business luncheon. Alexander looked genuinely confused. Remember what? Everything. His expression softened slightly. Important things are easy to remember. The answer lingered in my thoughts long after lunch ended. The strange part was that he never treated me differently because of who he was. If anything, he seemed determined to avoid using his status. He never mentioned his wealth, never discussed achievements, never acted impressed by himself. Most powerful men I had met enjoyed reminding people how important they were. Alexander seemed almost uncomfortable when attention focused on him. One evening, several weeks later, our design team attended a formal corporate reception hosted by Hayes Global. The event occupied the top floor of one of the tallest buildings in downtown Chicago. Glass walls surrounded the ballroom. The city stretched endlessly beyond the windows, glowing beneath thousands of lights. It should have felt glamorous. Instead, I spent most of the evening trying not to attract attention. Unfortunately, attention found me anyway. Claire. My stomach tightened instantly. I recognized the voice before turning around. Ryan. Standing beside the bar. Looking exactly the same. Maybe slightly more tired. Maybe slightly less confident. But unmistakably Ryan. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What are you doing here? I asked quietly. Trying to talk to you. My pulse accelerated. Not because I missed him. Because seeing him reopen wounds I thought were healing. Ryan, this is not the place. You never answered my messages. Because I did not want to. The truth landed harder than I expected. Ryan looked genuinely disappointed. Claire, please. Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Calm. Deep. Controlled. Is there a problem? Alexander stood beside me. I had no idea when he arrived. His expression remained perfectly neutral. Yet something about his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. Ryan straightened. No problem. Alexander glanced toward me instead of Ryan. Miss Bennett. The simple question carried unexpected meaning. He was not answering for me. He was allowing me to answer for myself. No, I said. Everything is fine. Alexander nodded once. Good. Then, without another word, he remained beside me. Not possessive. Not confrontational. Simply present. Ryan eventually left. The conversation ended. The evening continued. Yet as I stood near the enormous windows overlooking Chicago, one realization settled quietly into my heart. For the first time since my world fell apart, someone made me feel protected without making me feel controlled. And somehow, that mattered more than I was ready to admit. Safety does not arrive all at once. Sometimes it enters your life quietly, one small moment at a time, until you suddenly realize you are no longer afraid. 2 months passed after the reception where Ryan unexpectedly reappeared. During those weeks, my life settled into a rhythm I had almost forgotten was possible. Work remained busy. The commercial project continued exceeding expectations. My confidence slowly returned. More importantly, thoughts of Ryan no longer dominated my days. He became what he should have been all along, part of my past. Meanwhile, Alexander continued appearing in my life with an almost unsettling consistency. Not constantly, not aggressively, just enough that every encounter felt natural. A lunch meeting here, project review there, a charity event, a phone call about business details. Gradually, conversations that once focused entirely on work began expanding into something more personal. I learned he preferred black coffee without sugar. He learned I collected vintage home design books. He knew my favorite season was autumn. I discovered he secretly enjoyed old jazz records. Small details, Ordinary details. The kind that somehow matter more than grand gestures. One Friday afternoon, a severe storm swept across Chicago. Dark clouds covered the city before noon. Rain hammered against office windows. By evening, traffic reports warned of flooding and road closures throughout several neighborhoods. Unfortunately, my apartment building chose that exact day to experience a plumbing emergency. I returned home to find maintenance crews occupying the lobby and water shut off throughout the entire building. At least 3 days, the manager explained apologetically. 3 days. I stared at him in disbelief. Hotels across the city were nearly full because of a large convention. Every available room cost a small fortune. I spent an hour calling different locations without success. Frustration grew with every conversation. Finally, my phone rang. "Alexander, you sound irritated," he said immediately after I answered. "Long day. What happened?" Normally, I avoided discussing personal problems. Yet exhaustion lowered my defenses. I explained the situation. The flooding. The building repairs. The lack of hotel availability. Silence followed for several seconds. Then Alexander spoke. "Stay at my guest house." I almost laughed. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because normal people do not move into a chief executive officer's property, because their plumbing stops working. The guest house is empty." "Still no." His voice remained calm. "Claire." Something about hearing my name from him always captured my attention. "You need a safe place to stay." "I have one." The simplicity of the statement made arguing difficult. "I cannot impose." "You are not imposing." "Alexander." "Claire." I smiled despite myself. The man could be remarkably stubborn when he chose. 3 hours later, I stood inside the guest house located on Alexander's property overlooking Lake Michigan. The building was beautiful without feeling extravagant. Warm lighting, comfortable furniture, bookshelves, large windows facing the water. It felt less like a luxury property and more like a home. "You planned this," I accused jokingly as he carried in my suitcase. "Planned a citywide plumbing emergency?" "Good point." To my surprise, he laughed. The sound transformed his entire face. Softer, younger, more human. As he prepared to leave, I noticed something unusual. He paused near the doorway and seemed to hesitate. "What?" I asked. For a moment, Alexander appeared almost embarrassed. "Nothing." "That is definitely not nothing." He looked away briefly before answering. "Your jasmine fragrance is here now." I blinked. "What?" His expression grew thoughtful. "The house feels different." The statement should have sounded strange. Somehow it did not. There was no possessiveness in his voice. No obsession. Just honesty. Pure and simple honesty. Then he shook his head lightly, as if realizing he had said too much. "Get some rest." After he left, I stood alone in the quiet guest house watching rain move across the dark lake outside. For the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. And somewhere deep inside, a realization began forming. The safest place I had found since my heartbreak was not a location. It was the presence of one particular man. The most dangerous moment in a healing heart is the moment it starts believing it deserves happiness again. I stayed at Alexander's guest house for 4 days. The plumbing repairs finished sooner than expected, but by then something had quietly changed. Not the situation, not the circumstances. Me. Every morning I woke to sunlight reflecting across Lake Michigan. Every evening I returned from work to a place that felt calm and welcoming. There was no pressure, no expectations. Alexander never appeared unexpectedly, never checked on me constantly, yet somehow every detail had been considered. Fresh coffee beans appeared in the kitchen because he remembered I loved coffee. Extra blankets arrived after one unusually cold evening. A collection of architecture and design books appeared on a shelf near the fireplace. When I asked about them, he simply said, "I thought you might enjoy them." The strange part was that he never acted as though any of it deserved recognition. To Alexander, taking care of people seemed as natural as breathing. By the time I returned to my apartment, I found myself missing the quiet routine more than I wanted to admit. A week later, Alexander invited me to dinner. Not a business meeting. Not a project discussion. Dinner. The realization occupied my thoughts for nearly 3 days. I changed outfits twice before leaving my apartment, then changed them again, which was ridiculous. I was 27 years old, not a nervous teenager. Unfortunately, my reflection in the mirror seemed determined to disagree. The restaurant overlooked the lake. Soft lighting reflected across the water beyond enormous windows. Piano music drifted quietly through the dining room, elegant without being intimidating. The moment I arrived, Alexander stood to greet me. The gesture felt old-fashioned in a way I secretly liked. "You look beautiful tonight." The compliment caught me completely off guard. Not because of what he said, because of how sincerely he said it. No performance. No charm. Just truth. Heat rushed to my face. "Thank you." Throughout dinner, conversation flowed effortlessly. Family, childhood memories, travel, dreams, hopes. For the first time, I saw a version of Alexander that the rest of the world never witnessed. The powerful chief executive officer disappeared. In his place sat a thoughtful man who worried about disappointing people. A man who called his mother every Sunday. A man who secretly donated to educational programs because a teacher once changed his life when he was young. "You hide this side of yourself," I observed. Alexander looked amused. "What side?" "The human side." A rare laugh escaped him. "I was not aware I appeared non-human." "You know exactly what I mean." He smiled and looked down at his glass. "Most people prefer the simpler version." "And what version is that?" "The cold chief executive officer." I studied him carefully. "That is not who you are." Something changed in his expression then. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. As though hearing those words mattered more than he expected. After dinner, we walked along the shoreline. The evening air carried the scent of the lake. City lights shimmered across the water behind us. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence felt comfortable, familiar. Then Alexander suddenly stopped walking. "Can I tell you something strange?" he asked. "Of course." He hesitated. The hesitation itself surprised me. Alexander rarely seemed uncertain about anything. "The first thing I noticed about you was your jasmine fragrance." I blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "The night we met in the hotel." A small smile appeared on his face. Everyone else smelled like expensive perfume, coffee, or rain. Then there was you. I laughed softly. That might be the strangest compliment I have ever received. Probably. His gaze met mine. Warm, steady, honest. But it is true. For a moment, the world seemed unusually quiet. No traffic. No distant conversations. Just the sound of water moving against the shoreline. Standing beside him beneath the Chicago skyline, I realized something important. Ryan had spent years making promises he never kept. Alexander had spent months proving things he never needed to say. And for the first time since my heartbreak, I found myself looking toward the future instead of the past. The past has a strange habit of returning right when your future finally begins to look bright. A month passed after the dinner by the lake. Autumn arrived in Chicago, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. The air felt cooler. The days grew shorter. Somehow life felt lighter. Alexander and I never officially defined what we were becoming. We did not need to. Some connections develop naturally when two people stop fighting what they already know. We spent more time together. Weekend breakfasts, long conversations, quiet evenings watching the city lights from his terrace. Nothing dramatic. Nothing rushed. The comfort between us deepened with every passing week. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt genuinely happy. Which was precisely when Ryan decided to return. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was reviewing furniture samples when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. Something made me answer. "Hello." Silence. Then a familiar voice. "Claire." Every muscle in my body tightened. "Ryan." I had not spoken to him in months. "What do you want?" I asked calmly. The calm surprised even me. Once upon a time, hearing his voice would have shattered my entire day. Now it simply felt distant. Like hearing a song I no longer liked. "Can we talk?" "No, please." I closed my eyes briefly. "Ryan, there is nothing left to discuss." "There is for me." His voice sounded different, less confident than before, less certain. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I looked out the office window toward the skyline. The words should have satisfied me. Instead, I felt nothing. I hope you learn from it. Claire. Desperation entered his voice. I still love you. The statement landed with surprising emptiness. Months earlier, those words would have meant everything. Now they felt like echoes from someone else's story. Goodbye, Ryan. I ended the call. My hands remained steady. My heartbeat stayed normal. For the first time, I realized I had truly moved on. Unfortunately, Ryan was not finished. Over the following weeks, he appeared repeatedly. Not aggressively. Not dangerously. Just persistently. Flowers arrived at my office. Letters appeared in my mailbox. Mutual friends mentioned conversations with him. He seemed determined to convince the world that he regretted losing me. The attention became exhausting. One Saturday afternoon, everything finally came to a head. Alexander and I were attending an outdoor charity event sponsored by several local businesses. Families filled the park. Children ran between activity booths. Music drifted through the cool autumn air. It should have been a perfect day. Then Ryan appeared. I noticed him approaching from across the lawn. My stomach sank immediately. Claire. Alexander turned toward the voice. His expression remained unreadable. Ryan stopped several feet away. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Ryan looked directly at me. I need 5 minutes. No, please. No, the answer came easier this time. Stronger. Ryan glanced briefly toward Alexander. Is this because of him? Before I could answer, Alexander quietly stepped back, giving me space, giving me control. Once again, he refused to speak for me. The gesture meant more than Ryan could possibly understand. I looked directly at the man I once planned to marry. This has nothing to do with him. Confusion crossed Ryan's face. Then why? For a moment I searched for the right words. Then I realized the truth was incredibly simple. Because I finally remembered my worth. Silence followed. Around us the event continued. Children laughed. Music played. Leaves drifted across the grass. Life moved forward. Ryan stared at me as if seeing someone unfamiliar. Perhaps he was. The version of Claire who accepted less than she deserved no longer existed. Eventually he nodded slowly. Sadness filled his expression. Acceptance. At last. Then he turned and walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. Not with anger. Not with regret. Just peace. Beside me, Alexander remained silent for several moments. Then he offered a small smile. You handled that well. I smiled back. I learned from a good example. And standing there beneath the autumn sky, I realized the chapter one once thought defined my life had finally come to an end. Some answers arrive when you stop searching for them. Others arrive because someone finally decides you deserve the truth. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the Chicago streets weeks before Christmas. The city transformed into a landscape of white rooftops, glowing storefronts, and golden lights reflected across icy sidewalks. Everywhere I looked, people seemed to be celebrating something. For the first time in a long while, I felt like celebrating too. The project my company completed had become one of our greatest successes. My career was thriving. My friendships felt stronger. Most importantly, my heart finally felt whole again. Alexander remained at the center of that transformation. Yet despite everything we shared, one question continued lingering quietly in the back of my mind. Why me? Not because I doubted my worth. Those days were gone. But Alexander Hayes could have chosen anyone. Successful women. Famous women. Women who moved comfortably through his world of executives and private events. Instead, he kept choosing me. One snowy evening in December, I finally asked. We were sitting beside the fireplace in his home. Outside, snowflakes drifted past enormous windows overlooking the lake. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and coffee. Comfortable silence surrounded us. Can I ask you something? I said. Alexander looked up from the book he had been reading. Always. I smiled slightly. That answer never changed. Why did you notice me? For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then understanding followed. He closed the book carefully and set it aside. That is a complicated question. I have time. A faint smile appeared, then disappeared. His expression became thoughtful, serious, almost vulnerable. Do you remember the hotel where we first met? Of course. I had been there before. I waited quietly. Several years earlier. Something in his voice made me pay closer attention. What happened? Alexander looked toward the fireplace for several seconds before answering. My father died that year. The confession surprised me. He rarely discussed personal pain. I am sorry. He nodded slightly. It was a difficult period. The fire crackled softly between us. Outside, snow continued falling. I spent months feeling disconnected from everything. His gaze lowered briefly. Work became the only thing I understood. I listened without interrupting. One afternoon, I was sitting in that same hotel lobby after a meeting. I remember feeling exhausted. A small smile touched his face. Then someone walked past. My heart slowed. Me. He nodded. You were talking to an elderly woman near the coffee counter. Confusion filled me immediately. I do not remember that.
Ido.
His answer came quietly. She dropped several shopping bags. Everyone else walked around her. I stared at him. I helped pick them up. You did more than that. The memory slowly returned. Vague. Faint. You walked her outside and waited until her ride arrived. My chest tightened unexpectedly. That was years ago. I know. His expression softened. You were smiling the entire time. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable silence. Emotional silence. The kind created when truth finally arrives. That is why. I asked softly. Alexander laughed under his breath. Not immediately. He shook his head. But I remembered the jasmine fragrance. Heat rushed into my cheeks. You remembered that for years? Yes. There was no embarrassment in his answer.
No apology.
Just honesty.
Pure honesty.
Every time our paths crossed afterward, you were exactly the person I expected you to be. His gaze met mine. Steady. Warm. Certain. Kind. Genuine. Thoughtful. Emotion filled my chest so quickly it became difficult to breathe. Not because his words sounded perfect. Because they sounded real. Suddenly everything made sense. The attention. The patience. The way he noticed details nobody else saw. The reason he valued things the rest of the world overlooked. It was never about obsession. It was never about fantasy. It was about recognition. Somewhere in the middle of his hardest year, a stranger unknowingly reminded him that kindness still existed. And years later, sitting beside the man who had quietly carried that memory all this time, I realized our story had begun long before either of us understood where it would lead. Sometimes the happiest endings are not the ones that give you everything you wanted. They are the ones that give you what you never realized you needed. Spring arrived 6 months later. The snow disappeared. The trees around Lake Michigan turned green again. Chicago felt brighter somehow. Warmer. Alive. Looking back, it amazed me how much life could change within a single year. 12 months earlier, I sat alone in a hotel lobby convinced my future had been destroyed. Now I stood beside the man who had quietly rebuilt my faith in love without ever asking for credit. The transformation still felt unreal at times. My career continued growing. New clients arrived regularly. The commercial project that once seemed impossible had opened doors throughout the city. More importantly, I woke up every morning feeling something I had almost forgotten existed. Peace. Real peace. The kind that settles deep inside your heart and stays there. One Saturday afternoon, Alexander invited me to visit a property he recently purchased along the shoreline north of the city. The drive took less than an hour. The house itself overlooked the water from a gentle hill surrounded by trees and wildflowers. It was beautiful, elegant without feeling excessive, warm instead of intimidating. We spent most of the afternoon walking through empty rooms discussing renovation ideas. Old habits die hard. Every space inspired another design conversation. You are already redesigning the entire house in your head, Alexander observed. I smiled. Maybe. Definitely. We laughed together and continued exploring. Eventually, we reached a covered terrace overlooking the lake. Sunlight danced across the water. A cool breeze carried the familiar scent of spring. Everything felt quiet. Perfectly quiet. Alexander stopped walking. Something about his expression immediately captured my attention. Serious. Thoughtful. Certain. Claire. The way he said my name made my heart skip. What is it? For a moment he simply looked at me. Then he smiled softly. A year ago, I watched you sitting alone in a hotel lobby. Emotion instantly filled my chest. I remembered that night perfectly. The rain. The heartbreak. The feeling that everything was over. You looked like someone carrying the weight of the world. His voice remained calm. Gentle. I wanted to help. My eyes began stinging unexpectedly. You did. Alexander shook his head slightly. No, he stepped closer. You saved yourself. Tears blurred my vision. Not because of the words. Because they were true. Throughout our entire relationship, he never treated me like someone broken. Never acted as though he rescued me. He simply stood beside me while I found my own way forward. You reminded me what kindness looked like years before we ever spoke. He continued quietly. Then you reminded me again every day afterward. The lake shimmered behind him. Sunlight reflected across the water. The entire world seemed to pause. And now, I whispered. A smile appeared. Warm. Familiar. The smile that had become my favorite sight in the world. Now I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Everything after that felt both immediate and timeless. The answer lived in my heart long before the question arrived. Yes. His relief was so genuine it made me laugh through my tears. Then he laughed too. The sound echoed across the terrace. Light. Happy. Free. Months later, when friends asked how our story began, they always expected something dramatic. Something extraordinary. They expected the tale of a powerful chief executive officer and the woman who captured his attention. The truth was much simpler. A broken heart led me into a hotel lobby. A kind stranger offered me a seat beside the window. One conversation became another. One act of patience became another. And somewhere along the way, a man who noticed my jasmine fragrance taught me the difference between being wanted and being valued. Ryan once made me question my worth. Alexander helped me remember it. That became the foundation of everything that followed. Because real love does not ask you to become someone else. Real love helps you become yourself again. And standing beside the man who saw beauty in my kindness long before he ever saw beauty in me, I finally understood something important. The end of one story had never been my tragedy. It was simply the beginning of the one I was always meant to find.